France, 1429. A boy stands ankle-deep in blood, sword dripping, eyes gleaming with the thrill of killing. Behind him, the banners of Charles VII ripple in the smoke of battle. To his left rides Joan of Arc, the Maid of Orleans, Saint Martyr, girl. To his right, Gilles de Rais, nobleman, knight, future monster. At 17, Gilles was already a war prodigy. He charged through English lines like a demon in armor, his golden hair soaked dark beneath his helm. He fought beside Joan, prayed beside her, bled beside her. The people of France hailed him as a savior. The enemy called him the Devil's Blade. He smiled at both names. Born to one of the wealthiest families in Brittany, Gilles was taught Latin, theology, and swordplay, but what he mastered was dominance. By the time he was 20, he was dragging English commanders from horseback and slitting their throats before crowds. The church praised him. The king knighted him. No one saw the cracks, except maybe Joan. She said once, softly, so only he could hear, "There's something wrong in your shadow." By the time she was burned at the stake, Gilles was already pulling back from the battlefield. The war bored him now. The glory faded. The killing, he missed the killing, but not for king or crown, for himself. He returned home to his sprawling estates, and with him he brought something darker than war, an appetite he could no longer feed on the battlefield, and soon the children would begin to disappear. The gates of Tiffauges groaned open like the throat of some ancient beast. Gilles de Rais rode through them, cloaked in velvet, draped in medals, followed by priests, alchemists, actors, and boys. He had returned not as a soldier, but as a lord, a dark prince in peacetime, and peace would rot him from the inside. The castle walls were soon filled with music, masks, and strange smells. Incense mixed with butcher's blood. Rooms once built for monks became theaters. Chapels were stripped bare to build laboratories. He hung tapestries of crucifixions and mythic beasts. One fresco showed Saint Michael slaying a child-sized demon, except the demon had a boy's face. No one questioned it. He surrounded himself with flatterers, scholars of forbidden texts, and servants no older than 13. His treasurer noted food costs dropped dramatically. Wine consumption skyrocketed. The kitchens worked less, the dungeons more. Villagers noticed first. Parents murmured about children who went to the castle to sing and never came back. Gilles denied everything. He hosted feasts. He handed out coins. He told tales of Joan and her angels. But at night torches moved through his halls. Sobs echoed from below the floors. And in the wing, where no servant dared step, locks were fastened from the outside. He no longer slept well, because war had given him blood. But now he had time, and time is what monsters need most. It began with a boy named Jean, 7 years old, blonde, sang like a lark. His mother said the steward offered him a place in the chapel choir at Tiffauges. He walked there smiling, holding a pouch of sugared almonds. She never saw him again. When she came to the castle gates days later, sobbing and screaming, the guards turned her away. One offered her coins. Another threatened to have her arrested. She ran off, they said, drunk, mad. But inside the castle, behind a bolted iron door, Jan lay broken on a table of polished oak. He was not the last. A red-haired stable boy vanished after being called to polish boots. A pair of sisters, ages 8 and 10, were brought as pages. One returned mute, the other never returned at all. Peasants began murmuring of devils in noble skin. Mothers hid their children. Fathers sharpened axes they dared not raise. Inside the castle, Gilles's tastes grew stranger. He didn't want just silence. He wanted beauty first, then fear, then blood. He spoke of souls as if they were currency. He called pain the purest music. He dressed his victims in lace before the knife fell. The servants knew. They cleaned the floors, burned the rags, dug the pits. Some tried to flee. They were never seen again. In the village, candles began to burn at every window. Not in prayer, in warning. Tiffages had become a place where children walked in, and only screams came out. The room had no name. It was buried beneath the chapel, behind a door reinforced with iron bands and blessed wax seals that had long since faded. The few who saw it and lived would later describe it as a theater of cruelty, a temple to agony. The walls were lined with tapestries, but not of saints or knights. They showed naked children, painted in mythic scenes, tangled in flames, vines, ropes. Some were originals, others had once been real. There was a table in the center, oak, polished, cleaned obsessively. Gilles was meticulous. He could not abide mess. Blood had to flow in a way he found aesthetically pleasing. Next to the table, a collection of instruments. Blades curved like smiles, hooks, chains, a heated brand shaped like a cross, warped, and a mirror tall and gold-framed, where victims could see their own fear. Gilles would enter dressed in robes of midnight blue, trimmed in gold. He often wore perfume and pearls. The air choked with incense. He called it the purification. He liked to speak to them, to ask their names. He sometimes gave them sweets. Then he would say he loved them and begin. What he did next was so monstrous, so anatomically precise, that even hardened investigators wept years later reading servant confessions. And when it was done, he knelt beside their still bodies, sometimes weeping, sometimes laughing, always whispering something in Latin. Then the fire was lit, and the chamber was cleaned. And the next day another letter went out, inviting another child to the castle. Gold, that was what he wanted next. Gold enough to build cathedrals in his name. Gold enough to buy God's silence. So he summoned an alchemist. His name was Francois Prelati, a wandering Italian who claimed to speak with spirits and angels. He wore silk robes, smelled of sulphur, and carried books bound in skin. Gilles welcomed him like a prophet. Prelati promised him riches through a pact, but not with God, with something older. The ritual had rules, a circle drawn in virgin blood, candles made of tallow and bone, a sacrifice pure and terrifying. And so Gilles gave him what he asked for. The chamber changed. Now symbols lined the floor, pentagrams, astrological wheels, and ancient alphabets no priest dared translate. Prelati called upon Baron, a demon of knowledge and power. Gilles called him my lord. Together they slaughtered, not for lust, but for communion. They kept diaries, ritual logs. One entry reads, "The boy screamed as the spirit passed through. The flame turned blue. The gold did not come, but the feeling. The feeling was divine. The gold never arrived. but they kept killing anyway. They said the demon was testing their faith. By now, entire towns whispered of the devil's castle. Mothers prayed not to be chosen. Gilles did not care. He was no longer hiding. He believed he was evolving. It was the smell that betrayed him. Even the winds of Brittany could not hide the rot rising from behind Tiffagés. It seeped through the soil, clung to boots, drifted across fields like a warning. At first, locals thought it was dead livestock. Then a child's boot was found, half buried, stained dark, far from any farm. Then bones, small, human. A groundskeeper's dog uncovered part of a skull. The jaw still had milk teeth. Servants had long known, of course. They were the ones ordered to cleanse the chamber, to burn the bodies in lime pits, to stack the remnants behind false walls and under stairwells. One servant, a boy of 15, finally spoke. He described a room behind the wine cellar, a hatch, the smell, the sight, a pile of bones so high he couldn't see the floor, dozens of skulls, shattered ribs, a tiny hand, still wearing a lace cuff. When the magistrates arrived, they dug, and what they uncovered defied belief. Bodies, dozens, stripped, broken, scorched, boys and girls, no older than 12. Some posed, others twisted in agony. The pit was not a grave, it was a gallery, and at the bottom, wrapped in silk, was a child's head, resting on a pillow. The judges recoiled, the priests wept. No more whispers, no more doubt. The devil did not haunt Tiffagés. He ruled it. They brought them in one by one, the cooks, the stewards, the page boys, the stable hands, eyes down, hands shaking, voices barely above whispers. Each had seen something, but none had dared speak, until now. The first to confess was Henriette Gilles's most loyal servant. He trembled as he spoke. Not from guilt, but from memory. He made me hold them down, Henriette said. He said it made the spirit stronger if they screamed. He described how Gilles selected the children, the blonde ones first, the ones who cried prettiest, how he would kiss their foreheads and call them angels, how he'd slit their throats and drink from a golden cup. Then came Poitou, another servant. His voice cracked with every sentence. I saw him bathe in their blood, he said. He said it made him clean again, holy. They spoke of ropes, of iron hooks, of children dressed in silk before their final moments, so Gilles could admire their beauty before breaking it. One servant confessed to helping burn over 80 bodies. Another said he buried 20 under the stables. A boy claimed Gilles, asked him to fetch fresh ones from the village. The court sat in silence. No one interrupted. Even the bishop crossed himself between every testimony. The horror was no longer legend. It had names, faces, and witnesses who could still hear the screams when they closed their eyes. He entered the courtroom not in chains, but in silk. Gilles de Rais wore a robe of black velvet embroidered with gold. Rings adorned every finger. His hair was curled, his beard trimmed. He looked not like a prisoner, but like a prince attending a feast. He smiled as the charges were read. Murder, sodomy, blasphemy, ritual sacrifice, desecration of holy spaces, the slaughter of over 140 children. He didn't flinch. He corrected the record. More than 200, he said calmly. though some were never beautiful enough to count. Witnesses wept. Parents left the chamber. The judge begged him to be silent. But Gilles had waited years to speak freely, and now that he had an audience, he told everything. He described how he arranged the children on silk pillows, how he kissed them, bathed them, then carved them open to witness the soul leaving. He spoke of demons he called during rituals, of angels he thought he saw in the blood mist, of voices from the fire telling him he would never die. He did not beg. He did not deny. God made me this way, he said. I simply perfected what he began. By the end of the day, the court was silent, not out of reverence, but revulsion. One priest vomited into his own hands. They had seen a nobleman, a soldier, a knight. Now they saw the thing that wore his skin. Until now, the church had looked away. Gilles de Rais was a Marshal of France, a knighted war hero, a benefactor of abbeys and cathedrals. His crimes were whispered, but tolerated, too grotesque to be real, too noble to be punished. But when the bones surfaced, when the children's names were spoken in court, when Gilles bragged of summoning demons from candles carved with human fat, the church could no longer be silent. A bishop convened an emergency tribunal, not in a palace, but in a cold stone crypt. Holy men sat beneath crucifixes, faces pale, hands shaking. They did not just fear sin. They feared contamination. He has mocked the sacraments, one wrote. He has crucified innocence. He is Antichrist in noble robes. They sent emissaries to Rome. Some records say the Pope himself read the transcripts and wept. It wasn't just the murders. It was what Gilles said he saw in the dark. He claimed to have spoken with fallen angels, to have glimpsed the eyes of Satan inside the mirror of his chamber, to have tasted blood that sang with God's absence. Priests debated whether he was possessed, cursed, or simply evil, but all agreed. If the devil ever walked in France, he wore a knight's armor, and answered to the name Gilles de Rais. They came for him at dawn. No fanfare, no warning, just the iron stomp of boots on stone, and the hiss of torches in the mist. Soldiers, priests, magistrates, a procession of judgment, crossed the drawbridge of Tifages, like exorcists entering hell. Gilles de Rais stood in the great hall, still half-dressed in his sleeping robes, sipping wine from a silver cup. He did not flee, he did not resist. He simply asked, "Will you let me finish my drink?" They shackled him in front of his servants. He laughed as the manacles clicked shut, and joked that the iron felt warm, like a lover's hand. As he was led away, children watched from the tree line, their mouths silent, their eyes wide. For years, they had been told he was a saint, a patron, a protector. Now they saw the truth, and the truth wore slippers soaked in blood. The castle was seized, tunnels uncovered, chambers opened. What they found, ash piles, scorched bones, stained garments, would take months to catalogue. The local priest refused to step inside. He simply said, "May angels cover their eyes." In the villages, bells rang, not in mourning, but in warning. A man who once rode beside Joan of Arc now sat in a dungeon, wrapped in velvet and madness, awaiting his trial. And outside his cell, the air began to fill with the names of the missing. The chamber was silent, but for his voice. Gilles de Rais sat calmly, hands folded, eyes clear. Before him stood judges, clerics, and scribes. Behind him, The ghosts of over 100 children seemed to breathe in the walls. He began to speak. He described the first kill with the precision of a surgeon and the thrill of an addict. How the boy cried, how the knife caught on bone, how warm the blood was, how he felt something open inside him, not remorse, but revelation. He said he kept a ledger. The pages had numbers, names, descriptions, ages, favorite songs, final words. The court begged him to stop. He did not. He confessed to hanging children by their wrists and slicing them open slowly to see how the body worked, to forcing others to watch, to kissing them as they died. He described the altar, the black candles, the Latin invocations, the smell of burning innocence. He said demons came in dreams, not to tempt, but to applaud. I did not kill for pleasure, he said. I killed for beauty, for the music of their agony, for the promise of more. One clerk fainted. Another ran from the room, sobbing. A priest tried to strike him and was held back, but Gilles smiled, because finally someone was listening. They held the trial in Nantes, in a hall meant for kings, but now it reeked of incense, sweat, and fear. Hundreds gathered, nobles, priests, parents, priests, parents. Some came in grief, others came for spectacle. All came to hear the truth from the lips of a man who had once walked beside saints. Gilles de Rais entered in black, no chains, no shame. He bowed slightly, as if accepting applause. The charges were read aloud. Over 140 murders, desecration of corpses, invocation of demons, sodomy, heretical sacrifice. Each word fell like a stone. Each pause was filled with the gasps of mothers who had lost children, who now knew how they had been lost. Witnesses testified. A weeping boy who had escaped the chamber. A servant who carried buckets of blood to the furnace. A priest who found bone fragments in the chapel well. But nothing compared to the words of Gilles himself. He did not deny. He performed. He recited lines from memory, described how the children's eyes looked when they realized what was coming. He mimicked their voices. He laughed at his own cruelty. I am not sorry, he said, only hungry, still hungry. The bishop stood to speak. His hands shook so violently he could barely lift the Bible. He declared Gilles not just guilty, but damned. And for the first time, Gilles went silent. The morning sky over Nantes was colorless. No sun, no wind, just the weight of a world holding its breath. Before his execution, Gilles de Rais requested a final mass. The church granted it, not for his soul, but for the townspeople. They needed to see him kneel, to know that even devils must bow before judgment. He was led to the cathedral in chains. He wept, not like a child, not like a man, but like something breaking or pretending to. He clutched a crucifix with hands that had held knives. He recited the liturgy with the same lips that had whispered to demons. He asked to embrace the parents of his victims. Some refused. One mother spat on him. Another touched his face and said, "Burn slowly." At the altar, the priest's voice cracked as he offered the host. Gilles took it in trembling silence. It was the first time he'd eaten without blood in years. When the mass ended, he stood slowly. "I ask forgiveness," he said, "not from God, from the children. May they never find me again." The crowd parted as he passed, dragging his chains like old sins. Outside, the pyre had already been built. October 26, 1440. The square at Nantes overflowed, not with soldiers, but with parents, villagers, children clutching rosaries. They had all come to watch the death of the man who haunted their nights. The pyre stood high, stacked with straw and splintered wood soaked in oil. A single black post rose in the center, waiting. Gilles de Rais was led barefoot through the crowd. His silk robe had been stripped. His golden hair was gone. Only his voice remained. He sang a hymn, Latin, off-key, soft. He kissed the crucifix as they tied his arms behind him. A priest offered him final words. "I was born into glory," he said. "I die for beauty." The torch was lit. The flames caught fast, greedily, as if even fire wanted to erase what he had done. Some say he screamed. Others say he smiled until the end. One account claims the fire hissed a high-pitched sound, like a child's cry, but no one knows for certain. The crowd looked away. What they could not look away from was the smell. It clung to the city for days, and though the pyre turned him to ash, something in the air, in the ground, in the memory of France, refused to burn. After the execution, Tiffagés stood silent. The castle gates were sealed, the tapestries burned, the altar dismantled, but the land remembered. Parents refused to walk the forest paths. Hunters spoke of strange cries in the trees. Dogs barked at empty cellars. Villages near the castle emptied. Fields went untended. Even the birds avoided the towers. They said the wind moaned differently there, as if it carried old names. Children born in Brittany in the years that followed were told bedtime stories, not of witches, not of wolves, be of a man who smiled too sweetly, who offered candy, who wore blue velvet, and who whispered in the voice of the devil. Generations passed. The ruins of the castle were left to rot, but even in rubble the shadow remained, and sometimes, when the fog rolls in thick and low, it still does. They called it a fairy tale. A nobleman named Bluebeard, who killed his wives and hid their bodies in a locked room. A story to frighten children, to warn against curiosity. But behind every myth is a truth, and behind Bluebeard's door was a chamber much like Gilles de Rais. Scholars believe the legend was born to soften the horror, to give it rhyme, rhythm, safety. But the bones were real. The screams were real. The ash that once fell over Nantes was not metaphor. It was history. Gilles de Rais was not a character in a tale. He was a Marshal of France, a war hero, a nobleman, and he butchered children by the hundreds. The world tried to bury him beneath stories, but stories remember, and now so do you. Some monsters wear crowns, some speak Latin, and some are never truly gone.